GOP retreat. President Trump makes a pitch to Republicans gathering in West Virginia to back his plan for Dreamers. Honored guest, a Christian defector from North Korea, tells us about his journey to the State of the Union. Abortion in Ireland. A pro-life activist gives us an update from Dublin ahead of a referendum that could expand abortion across the Emerald Isle. And a unique exhibit. The Vatican puts a twist on some famous masterpieces. On EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, February 1st, 2018. Good evening from Washington, and thank you for joining us for News from a Catholic Perspective. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. President Trump says Republicans are coming off one of the greatest years in the history of a party, but he's calling on GOP senators to bring his immigration framework to a vote.
We have a great opportunity as a Republican Party. As the Republican Party, we have a great opportunity. We're getting very little help from the Democrats, but I hope after I leave this room, we're going to get a call from these people, say, let's go.
The president is speaking to Republicans who are on their annual retreat in West Virginia. The president says his proposal, a path for citizenship for nearly 2 million brought to the country illegally as children in exchange for money for his southern border wall and a major overhaul of the legal immigration system, represent the center, mainstream view of the American people. And the train carrying lawmakers to the retreat struck a garbage truck, killing 1 and injuring 6 others. The National Transportation Safety Board is investigating. Several people have reported a malfunction of the safety gates at that railroad crossing. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi joins us with more. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Wyatt. 28-year-old Christopher Foley died in that crash. He leaves behind a 1-year-old son. His co-workers call him a friend and a brother. House Chaplain Father Pat Conroy, a Jesuit, ministered to the injured, and lawmakers pitched in as well. Lawmakers who are doctors rushed to help when a train carrying Republican congressman hit a garbage truck in rural Virginia.
I counted at least 9 doctors that answered the call, and 2 nurses that answered the call, and a priest that gave last rites. The circumstances of that, if it was going to be a horrible tragedy, the American people would have been proud of how their members of Congress and that team launched into action and did the right thing.
Representative Phil Rowe of Tennessee, an obstetrician, was one of them.
Your brain just clicks into it's almost like riding a bicycle. You know what to do. You know you have to have an airway. You know we have to make sure you stabilize the neck.
Also on the train, Representative Roger Marshall of Kansas, another doctor.
I got on the scene. I also checked for pulses, couldn't find any, so we initiated CPR and tried for several minutes. And eventually EMS showed up. We tried shocking the patient a couple of times, still unsuccessful. Kept with CPR and just never really got the gentleman back.
Unfortunately, they weren't able to save that gentleman. 28-year-old Christopher Foley, worker on the truck.
We never know why God calls somebody home like he did yesterday, but at the same time, he was watching over us and allowed us to help our fellow man. Unfortunately, the accident occurred, but for those on the train, if we had not hit the back of that truck and we had hit it either head-on or directly into the side like a T-bone, I believe the whole train would have derailed.
Catholic Congressman Wenstrup also tells me he asked Father Pat Conroy to give Christopher Foley last rites. Lawmakers held a prayer service for the victim and his family, and President Trump offered his prayers today in West Virginia. Wyatt?
So just an upsetting way to start a GOP retreat. Jason, switching gears now, what are the issues Republicans are focusing on?
Well, this is a business meeting with time for families also to relax and bond with other lawmakers and their families. It's a big strategy session, too, on issues like immigration. Senators have until next week to come up with a deal on immigration to satisfy members of both parties.
And we'll see if they're able to get that done by next week. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi. Thanks, Jason. Kansas Governor Sam Brownback is sworn in as the U.S. Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom.
The office upon which I'm about to enter.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Brownback will report directly to the Secretary of State. The ambassador is in charge of monitoring religious persecution and discrimination. Ambassador Brownback is a former senator and a Catholic convert. A North Korean defector drew a standing ovation from both Democrats and Republicans at the State of the Union. It was an emotional moment for a man with a powerful story. White House correspondent Mark Irons spoke to him. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Wyatt. It's not only about freedom, but also faith. I can share the story behind that special moment at the State of the Union. Ji-Sung Ho tells me his conviction to help others goes beyond human rights. He wants to help them find God. His amazing story to find freedom brought everyone to their feet at the President's State of the Union. The next day, Ji-Sung Ho told me he doesn't have the words to describe it. He can only say,
It was the most memorable moment in my whole life.
Your great sacrifice is an inspiration to us all. Thank you.
According to Ji-Sung Ho, his sacrifice is divine doing. He says God chose him to escape North Korea. Those crutches are a reminder of what he overcame, traveling thousands of miles to break free from suffering on one leg. A Christian, he says, I think I offered so many prayers to my God. Sung Ho's dangerous journey out of North Korea brought him to the border with China, where he desperately tried to cross the Tumen River, almost drowning.
And I started to pray, God, just save me, rescue me.
Prayers answered. Today, Sung Ho works as an activist in South Korea, speaking out against the North Korean regime and rescuing other defectors.
Sung Ho's story is a testament to the yearning of every human soul to live in freedom.
Tell me about your Christian faith, how it inspires you.
God's love needs to be conveyed to the people in North Korea, and North Korean souls need God's salvation. And under that conviction, I am doing what I'm doing.
Ji-Sung Ho's message is summed up like this. He tells me, God is love. Wyatt?
Correspondent Mark Irons reporting from the White House. Thanks, Mark. The president is expected to tell Congress probably tomorrow that he approves releasing a memo about the FBI's investigation into possible Russian collusion.
The purpose is transparency. Remember, this is a legislative process. They've initiated it. We're only following through.
The memo alleges misconduct by the FBI in its probe. The Justice Department and Democrats are lobbying President Trump to stop the release, saying it could harm national security and mislead the public. We're now joined by Hans von Spakovsky, a senior legal fellow at the Heritage Foundation, and he previously worked as a lawyer at the Justice Department. Hans, welcome back. So what could be in this classified memo and why is it such a big deal that some people would not want it released?
In order to get an electronic surveillance warrant from the FISA court, the FBI and the Justice Department have to swear under oath into submission that there are facts and circumstances indicating that the person they want to target is the agent of a foreign power. If, in fact, they were relying on the Trump dossier, in other words, relying on opposition research that had not been verified, had not been confirmed by the FBI, then in essence they misled the court, potentially lied to the court, and if so, then the warrant that was issued was invalid.
The FBI says it has grave concerns about the accuracy of the classified memo, and the Justice Department said it would be extraordinarily reckless to release it. Are their concerns justified?
I don't think so, because remember, one of the people that has said this should be released is, of course, Jack Kelly, Marine Corps general, someone who understands very well how important it is to protect our national security means. And if he thinks there isn't anything in it that's going to compromise our national security, I trust him that, in fact, it ought to be released.
On Monday, White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders said poll after poll shows no one really cares in too much detail about the Russia probe and in the sense of how it's affecting, regular Americans. Right. How do you think the release of a memo would affect Americans, if at all?
I think if they see that the FBI and Justice Department lawyers abused their authority to engage in a partisan investigation under the guise that it was an counterintelligence operation, I think people are going to be very concerned about that, and they should be. That kind of abuse of the law should not be allowed.
President Trump has also told allies that the release of the memo could discredit the Russia probe. What could be in the memo that could possibly do that?
Well, like I said, if in fact what started off this probe was an unverified, unconfirmed dossier that was basically opposition research paid for by the Clinton campaign, I think that might potentially say that the entire investigation was started based on a fallacy. And that, in fact, could raise a lot of questions about it.
Okay, we'll be watching to see the developments in this. Hans von Spakovsky with the Heritage Foundation, thanks so much for talking with us.
Thanks for having me.
The Associated Press confirms 5 mass graves in Myanmar, also known as Burma.
What is shocking and continues to shock and should continue to shock the conscience of the international community is the horror of these crimes and the brutality with which the Burmese government has attacked the Rohingya population.
The AP says it's the latest evidence for what looks increasingly like genocide against the Muslim minority. Myanmar denies the massacres occurred. More than 30,000 women in rural Sudan are reaping the benefits of a U.S. decision to lift economic sanctions 3 months ago. The women now have access to loans for businesses related to farming. The goal is to reach 1 million women and their families by 2025. Germany's parliament votes to resume family reunions for temporary refugees, but sharply restricts the number of relatives. Protesters outside Parliament were disappointed that the limit of 1,000 each month. They said they held signs saying family life is everything. Lawmakers say the law is a compromise between being generous and being realistic.
To jest w Kongresie Amerykańskim, gdzie mnie wczoraj czy przedwczoraj błagali, żeby to w ogóle do Senatu nie przeszło.
Poland's Senate backs legislation regulating speech about the Holocaust. The bill outlaws any attempts to blame the Polish state for crimes committed by the Nazis. The U.S. has asked Poland to drop the controversial bill. North Korea's 32-member delegation arrives at the Olympics Village in South Korea. The communist nation is taking part in the Winter Games after negotiations that ended more than 2 years of silence with its neighbor. The two countries will march under the same flag in the opening ceremonies. The Olympics begin February 7th. Coming up, ripple effect. The fallout continues from the sexual abuse scandal involving a former U.S. gymnastics doctor. And fighting for the unborn. We talk with a pro-life activist in Ireland as the country prepares for a referendum on abortion.
Che si impadronisce della vita e ti porta a andare.
Pope Francis says at his daily Mass in the Vatican, we should reflect on what legacy we will leave behind and not become too focused on the present moment because that can, quote, imprison us and make us selfish. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby in for Lauren Ashburn. Former sports physician Larry Nassar appears in court once again on more charges of sexual assault. The fallout from 20 years of his abuse continues, and it's now causing a ripple effect at Michigan State University.
Hope can be a model.
A new interim president has been named at Michigan State University. The entire board of USA Gymnastics has resigned, all because this man was allowed to abuse young girls unchecked for over 20 years.
I will never forgive you for this.
At least 65 women are expected to speak in a Michigan courtroom this week about being sexually assaulted by Larry Nassar. He must listen to them as part of his guilty plea to 3 counts of criminal sexual conduct.
Your abuse took 3 years of my life away from me.
Earlier this month, another 156 women gave their victim statements for similar crimes. In that case, Nassar was sentenced to up to 175 years in prison. That's on top of 60 years for federal child pornography charges. Some of the victims in this week's case told a judge Michigan State University bears some of the blame.
I'm completely heartbroken and betrayed by the school's administration. It's time to accept responsibility for your actions, or rather, lack thereof, and step down.
MSU has denied any wrongdoing. After former President Lou Anna Simon resigned and apologized to victims, the school has tapped former Michigan Governor John Engler as interim president.
The only innocents in all of this are those who were victimized.
But the choice of a politician is unwelcome for some students and faculty.
John Engler is the wrong direction. This is already spurring protests.
Engler told them he's here to take action.
Mark my words, change is coming.
In the current case, Nassar could be sentenced for up to 125 years in prison. His sentences from the other 2 cases already mean he'll spend the rest of his life in prison. Catholic bishops in Ireland are calling for respect for life, that ahead of a referendum in May that would overturn its current pro-life laws. The head of Ireland's government has already taken a side.
For my part, I will advocate the yes vote. My own views have evolved over time. Life experience does that.
That's the Irish Prime Minister speaking on Monday. He says he used to be pro-life, but is now in favor of the repeal. Abortion is currently illegal except if the mother's life or health is in danger. If voters choose to repeal the pro-life amendment, it could allow abortion for the first 12 weeks of pregnancy. Joining us now is Katie Asco, a pro-life activist from Dublin, Ireland. Last month, Asco received the Westminster Award for Human Life, Human Rights, and Human Dignity for her achievements in protecting the right to life. So, Katie, the Eighth Amendment of the Irish Constitution acknowledges the right to life. What does the referendum propose, and do you think there's public support for it?
Sure. So this referendum is proposing the Irish people to remove the Eighth Amendment from our Constitution. So by removing the Eighth Amendment, we would be stripping away all right to life from unborn babies here in Ireland and would essentially be introducing abortion on demand in our country. So politicians are talking about replacing this with legislation that would allow for abortion up to 12 weeks for any reason and up to birth for things like risk to health of the mother or so-called fatal fetal abnormalities. But that's only what they're talking about now. And we know that over time, once abortion is legalised in a country, it just becomes a social norm and the laws do get less and less restrictive. So it's a worrying proposition, and there is Irish support for repealing the Eighth Amendment, but there is not such support for abortion on demand, which is what is being proposed at the moment. And we are confident that over the next few months, as the public inform themselves and hear the debates on TV and inform themselves over the next few months, we are confident that they will vote to retain the Eighth Amendment.
And speaking of those debates, you are campaigning to keep the Eighth Amendment and to protect the unborn. So what's your strategy and how do you think that's going so far?
Absolutely. There's lots being done to work to keep the Eighth Amendment here in Ireland. So we have canvassing teams that are doing incredible work all across the country. We have people going door to door. We have people canvassing on the streets. We also have a big March for Life that's happening in the month of March itself. We have a very strong grassroots movement. That's really the strength and the heart of the pro-life movement here in Ireland. So we're going to have lots of people out having conversations. We're going to have media spokespersons engaging in debate through media outlets as well. And it's going to take everybody really just rolling up their sleeves and getting involved. But we are confident that we have the feet on the ground and the people necessary to do that.
Well, as you say, Katie, Ireland is still a very pro-life country. It's one of the very few countries where abortion is still highly restricted. How do young people feel about the life issue? You mentioned the March for Life there.
Absolutely. So the young people here in Ireland, I mean, it's quite difficult to be pro-life in Ireland, especially on campuses. We've seen quite a lot of shutdown on freedom of speech. I've spoken on this topic before. There was my own impeachment, the impeachment of my friend. We've seen the shutting down of pro-life groups on campus, not being allowed to put up their posters or get funding or use campus facilities for their events. So that doesn't make it any easier. But there's a strong group of pro-life people who are young and who really do hold those beliefs so strongly, but it's difficult for them to speak up. There are, of course, a lot of young people who are pro-choice as well, but as I said, we are very confident that with the campaign that we have to roll out over the next few months, with the information that we will be presenting to the public, that public opinion will change. It's also very interesting to note that only 6% of the Irish people are aware that 1 in 5 pregnancies in the UK end in abortion, and only 10% of the Irish people are aware that 90% of children pre-diagnosed with Down syndrome in the UK are aborted. So it really does show that the Irish people haven't been fully informed on the facts about what abortion really is. So that's going to be a major focus of the campaign of the next few months.
Sure, absolutely. I know there are so many pro-life people who will be supporting your campaign. Katie Asco, pro-life activist, thanks so much for telling us about it.
Thank you.
Tonight on EWTN Pro-Life Weekly, a member of Congress from Pennsylvania says pro-life Americans should be pressuring their lawmakers to pass pro-life laws.
Every single one of your viewers needs to get on the phone and call their senator's office and encourage them to take up this legislation. We have senators who have said that they're pro-life. We need to see what they're going to do to follow through on that commitment.
You can see the entire interview at 10 p.m. Eastern tonight on EWTN. Pro-Life Weekly re-airs Sunday morning at 10. Up next, Culture of Death. The Pope's prayer intentions for February feature a message for those in power. And Divine Creatures. The Vatican has a new art exhibit. We'll take you there.
Para que aquellos que tienen un poder material, político o espiritual no se...
Pope Francis is praying for an end to corruption this month. The Holy Father says we have to stare it down and speak up, adding corruption is not countered with silence. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. A group of nearly 700 Catholic nuns is still helping researchers at the University of Minnesota learn more about Alzheimer's disease. The Nun Study, as it's known, involves religious sisters from across the U.S. who donated their brains to science after they died. Only 3 are still alive today, but the study continues. One of the main findings, how and what one writes in their early 20s can be an indicator of Alzheimer's later in life. And scientists find a small pacemaker implanted into the brain of an Alzheimer's patient may help slow the disease. Research at Ohio State University found all 3 patients were able to delay the decline in problem solving and decision making. One patient is able to continue to play the piano even after her diagnosis. A new exhibit at the Vatican museums features people with disabilities as models. They are recreating 10 famous paintings about the life of Jesus. Vatican correspondent Juliet Lindley shows us how.
The art is sacred, the models exceptional, the works sublime. As these young people bring Caravaggios and other masterpieces to life, divinity and disability dovetail perfectly. Curator Nicole Forti says it creates a strong sense of solidarity.
These special people offer to us with simplicity, with a very easy way, this message. We are exactly the same.
Ho pensato che Gesù non è con gli ultimi.
The project's creator Adamo Antonacci says Eli Wiesel's book Night inspired him. The book recounts the author's experience in the concentration camps at Auschwitz and Buchenwald. Antonacci says a passage which illustrates how God can be found even in moments of utmost desperation made him realize the Almighty is revealed precisely where man rejects him. And since people with special needs are often ostracized, he chose to make the figure of Christ, as represented in the history of art, coincide with disability in 10 magnificent photographs. Photographer Leonardo Baldini admits it was a risky endeavor.
Avevo questa responsabilità di far rivivere.
He says he felt a great responsibility to make the young people come to life, while staying true to the original artwork, all the while ensuring the finished work was credible. And visitors say the result is not just credible, it's incredible. This exhibit will be running at the Vatican for the next few weeks. It's free because organizers want as many of the 6 million annual visitors as possible to enjoy a collection that shows special needs youngsters in a very unique lens. At the Vatican, Juliet Lindley, EWTN News Nightly.
Thanks, Juliet, for that report. And that wraps up our newscast for tonight. We thank you for watching. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Wyatt Goolsby. We're back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night, and God bless.